Welcome back guys to the channel, and in today's video we need to look at again some of the most crazy amazing discoveries in history that are just insane. We're starting off with the discovery of the remains of a vampire woman in Poland. That's right, we're talking about the vampire here. The remains were discovered during the archaeological work in a 17th century cemetery in the town of Pien. Researchers found that the skeletal remains had a silk cap on its head, indicating it had held high social status, and a protruding tooth. The team, this is where it gets really weird because this is, guys, very unusual. The vampire underneath had a sickle across her neck, that's right, a sickle across the neck to prevent the resurrection. The team leader, Professor Dariusz Poliński of Nicolaus Copernicus University in the nearby city of Torun, said the shape of the burial was very unusual. Ways to prevent the resurrection of the dead include cutting off the head or legs, placing the deceased face down to bite the ground, burning it and crushing it with a stone, and stuff like that. This sickle was not laid flat but was placed on the neck in such a way that if the deceased ever tried to get up, the head would most likely get severed or injured. He added that the padlock, big toe on the skeleton, left foot, probably symbolizes the closing of a stage and the impossibility of the return. That's pretty crazy, guys. I mean, just imagine, like, why would you put a sickle on the neck of a deceased person? This is just very bizarre. Records of myths about the undead or vampires date back to the 11th century in the Eastern Europe. People feared that some of these buried would work their way back to the surface as blood-sucking monsters and basically terrorize the living people. In some parts of the continent, particularly among the Slavs, belief in vampire legends became so widespread that it caused mass hysteria and even led to the execution of people which were believed to be vampires back in the day. People who died prematurely, such as by suicide, were also often suspected of being of vampirism, and their bodies were mutilated to prevent them from rising from the dead. In 2015, archaeologists from the town of Dresko, 130 miles away, found 5 similarly buried skeletons in a 400-year-old graveyard. Sickles were found pressed against the throat of an adult male who was between 35 and approximately 44 years old, and an adult female who was between 35 and 39. An elderly woman who was between 50 and 60 years old when she died was buried with a sickle on her hips and a medium-sized stone at her throat. Very weird. According to popular wisdom, a sickle protected women in labor, children, and the dead against evil spirits. She also had a role in ritual designed to counterattack black magic and resurrection witchcraft, which is quite crazy. The latest discovery has now been shipped in Torun, where archaeologists will carry out further investigations on the matter. So guys, ancient vampires, you never know. I mean, this is a legend which has been growing for a long time, and looking at other aspects of it, we know that back in the day there were very interesting mythical creatures which were actually shown in old books, which right now are completely gone. So this could be true or could be fake, we don't know, obviously. Now, looking at the Petrified Trees in Arizona, guys, this is a very bizarre discovery, and also something quite unique about these. You see, a tree which is basically a semi-precious stone because it's effectively petrified. To do this, you have to bury the tree under a layer of earth without any access to oxygen to absorb certain minerals under the influence of enormous temperatures, and at the same time not rot or burn. What could effectively create such crazy conditions to allow for effectively the petrification of these trees? A global catastrophe or a reset, a war of an ancient civilization described, for example, in the Mahabharata with nuclear weapons, for example. Of course, this brings many questions, and the answer to this is that I wholly believe that this is not a coincidence. This has been made by a particular event in the world, and the event was so powerful that it actually petrified big trees and made them, like I said before, semi-precious stones, which is just absolutely incredible. Now, we know that there are many amazing discoveries, but there's also some things that were actually faked to create tourism. That's right, we're talking about fake history, and this is exactly the problem in Bolivia, in Tiwanaku. There are famous ruins of the temple of Kalasaya. Comparing pictures from 1905 and 2010, you will like to see that effectively they have reconstructed the entire temple. That's right, pretty crazy. Now the reconstruction, of course, is clear that that was done to effectively gather and bring tourists to the area. And this is a perfect example of how you can effectively modify, change, alter history and bring a new history in the history books by just simply restoring it if there is a particular interest in the area. Now, this is just one of many examples. You know that back in the day, even in Egypt, in many places, the restoration was so intense that actually it was pretty much more like a reconstruction or reimagination of the history. Now, is this a fair thing? Is this a good ethical thing to do? Is this correct? Is this the right thing to do? Of course, nobody has the answer to that, because at the end of the day, this was done for the purpose of generating more tourism and more income in the area. So you could argue that the necessity of the people from the area created a history which people accept and pay for. That's right, to go and visit. And guys, to finish off this video, let's talk about the advanced surgery which was done in ancient times. We're talking about 2000 years in the past. That's right, this is not a joke. They found the skull of a 2000-year-old Peruvian warrior who had been found to have been fused with metal. The warrior's head was fused with metal in one of the world's oldest examples of advanced surgery in ancient times, according to a museum. The Oklahoma Museum of Osteology says the skull found in this collection is that of a man who was wounded during battle before undergoing some of the earliest forms of surgery to implant a piece of metal in his head and repair the fracture. Experts told the Daily Star that the man survived the surgery and that the skull is now a key piece of evidence that the ancient people were capable of advanced surgery with basic tools. Now that doesn't make any sense, does it? Unless, of course, the ancient people from the past were much more developed. The skull in question is an example of Peruvian elongated skulls, in an ancient form of body modification where members of the tribe intentionally deformated the skull of young children by binding them with a cloth or even tying the head between two pieces of wood during prolonged periods of time. Now we know for a fact that this is actually false. This is the official narrative, but we know that you cannot actually elongate a skull. A skull cannot be elongated that much, so this means that these people were part of a different civilization. This is the Peruvian elongated skull with a metal surgical implant, and it just shows that effectively the old race at the time back in the day, they were not humans, they were a different race with different brain, different skulls effectively, and they had the technology and the ability to do effectively surgery on a brain, on a head 2000 years in the past. Now don't be fooled, of course the official narrative is going to tell you that this was done with ancient basic technology, or better said chisels and copper and dirty stuff. They didn't even have disinfectant. Okay, now just imagine for a second doing a surgery on a skull. That person would get so many infections, they would die of literally an infection. So it's not possible unless they had sterilizers and different materials to provide a proper surgery, which is only possible in the modern world. So guys, remember for a second, this is really important. The story which we know is very different from the real story, because many times stuff like this is being hidden from the truth because they do not want to recognize that things from the past are very different, and this would challenge the official narrative of the evolution. And guys, that's it for today's video. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I shall see you later in the next upload. Bye.